Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide. A reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that 8 of the 13 states already had their own constitutions that included a Bill of Rights when George Mason suggested adding a Bill of Rights to the U.S. Constitution? Join us as we learn how James Madison proposed certain language that stressed natural or God-given rights. Can you name any of our 10 natural freedoms found in the Bill of Rights? Join us as we realize the importance of each one and then decide which ones are the most valuable to you.
We are diving into a document that, it fundamentally defines the American experiment, but it's also one that was almost left on the cutting room floor. This isn't just about reading a list of rights. It's about understanding the intense political pressure cooker that forged the U.S. Bill of Rights.
Exactly. And when you look at those first 10 amendments, you are getting a shortcut today.
Yeah.
A shortcut to the strategic political maneuvers and really the foundational legal language that secured liberties for the next 2 centuries.
Right. So our mission today is to move past just, reciting the freedoms. We want to understand how and why these amendments, ratified on December 15th, 1791, became the non-negotiable price of admission for the entire Constitution.
And that's the key. It was a price.
Yeah, and the surprise context here is that this foundational document, this guarantee of our most basic liberties, it was born out of one of the biggest, most acrimonious arguments during the final days of the Constitutional Convention in 1787.
It really was. It wasn't an afterthought. It was a crisis.
A full-blown crisis.
And to appreciate that crisis, you have to realize that the idea of guaranteed rights wasn't new. Not at all. When the delegates met, 8 of the 13 states already had their own state constitutions, and those included established bills of rights. So people were used to seeing their liberties formally protected in writing.
Okay, so the fight wasn't about whether rights mattered.
Not at all. It was about whether they needed to be included at the national level.
Which leads us to the opposing forces, right? The Federalists, who generally supported the new Constitution, and the Anti-Federalists, who were deeply skeptical. The Anti-Federalists were the ones saying, wait a minute, we just fought a revolution against an overreaching power. Why are we creating a new central government without explicit written limits on what it can do to us?
And that's the core disagreement. It all centered on the perceived risk of a powerful central government. The Federalists argued that because the national government only had powers that were specifically granted to it by the Constitution, listing protections was unnecessary.
Or even dangerous, right?
Or even dangerous. They suggested that any right that wasn't listed was therefore not protected.
But the Anti-Federalists, led by George Mason of Virginia, they saw that ambiguity as an existential threat. And it's Mason who steps forward in 1787 and formally proposes adding a national Bill of Rights.
Mason was so passionate about this. He argued that a Bill of Rights would, and this is a great quote, give great quiet to the people.
I love that phrase.
He even famously underestimated how complex it would be, suggesting it might be prepared in a few hours.
A few hours?
Yeah, which tells you 2 things. First, he saw it as just urgent, a necessity. And second, he assumed the language would be pretty straightforward since so many states already had models to work from.
And speaking of models, what's so fascinating is how James Madison, who was the primary author of the Constitution itself, then pivots. He becomes the primary architect of the Bill of Rights. It's just a brilliant political maneuver.
It was a necessity. Madison initially sided with the Federalists. He believed it was unnecessary, but he was pragmatic. When several critical states, especially his home state of Virginia, threatened not to ratify the Constitution without those protections,
The whole thing could have collapsed.
the whole project would fail. So he took control of the process. He made sure the amendments would limit the power of Congress and frame them as natural or God-given rights.
So he transforms it from a roadblock into a masterpiece that, basically saves the nation. So after Mason proposes it and Madison shepherds it, how long does the formal process actually take?
Well, after the initial failure to adopt Mason's proposal in 1787, Madison worked diligently after the Constitution was ratified. By September 2nd, 1789, the Senate began formally debating his proposals. Then just 3 weeks later, on September 25th, Congress agreed on 12 specific amendments and sent them out to the states for ratification.
And the final date that matters to us is 1791.
That's right. On December 15th, 1791, Articles 3 through 12 achieved that necessary 3/4 majority. They officially became the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights.
And what about the first two?
Interestingly, the first two proposals, which dealt with congressional representation and pay, they weren't ratified at that time, so that left us with the 10 we know today.
Okay, that gives us the context. Now let's get into the actual substance. And there's no better place to start than the cornerstone, the First Amendment. It lays out 5 interdependent freedoms that define our ability to live, believe, and communicate freely.
It's so powerful because it simultaneously restricts the government and empowers the citizen. Let's look at the 5 restrictions it places on Congress, starting with the 2 religion clauses. Congress cannot pass laws respecting an establishment of religion. That's the Establishment Clause.
Right.
Nor can they prohibit the free exercise of religion, which is the Free Exercise Clause.
So this is the direct response to centuries of state-sponsored churches in Europe, making sure the federal government stays out of theology.
Precisely. Next, we move to the 3 communication freedoms. We have freedom of speech, the right to express opinions publicly without government interference. But let's be very clear, this is not a shield for all communication.
And this is where the distinction between protected and unprotected speech is so critical, and it's so often misunderstood. What are the key limitations placed on speech?
So the government can place limits on false statements that cause harm. You see 2 main types here. Libel.
Which is written.
Libel refers to false and defamatory statements made in writing or in a permanent form, like a broadcast. And then there's slander, which is the same type of defamatory statement, but spoken.
Okay.
The line is also drawn when speech directly incites violence or is legally determined to be part of an effort toward rebellion.
That distinction, written versus spoken harm, is one of those specific nuggets of knowledge that separates, the truly informed from those who just know the term free speech.
It is.
Let's move to freedom of the press.
Freedom of the press is the right to publish and disseminate printed or broadcast materials without prior government censorship. The founders saw the press as an essential watchdog.
But just like with speech, the press is accountable for what they publish. What limits apply there?
They're subject to the same laws of libel and, historically, sedition, words encouraging rebellion, and also obscenity. The freedom is broad, but it doesn't grant immunity from the consequences of publishing harmful falsehoods.
And the final 2 freedoms, they relate to collective action and official interaction.
You have the right to assemble, which ensures you can peaceably hold public meetings, protest, and form associations without government interference. And the 5th is the right to petition government, the right to make a complaint or seek government assistance, also known as the redress of grievances, without fear of retaliation.
Taken together, those 5 freedoms, they establish a complete framework for political opposition and self-governance. If you can speak, publish, protest, and complain to the government, you hold the power.
Exactly. They are the mechanisms of democratic pressure.
Now we shift gears a bit. If the First Amendment is about political and expressive freedom, the next amendments are mostly about securing property, personal safety, and fairness in the justice system. Let's start with the Second Amendment, which is still so intensely debated today.
Amendment 2. The right to bear arms. We really have to quote the full text here because the structure is key. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
And the text itself presents an immediate tension, doesn't it? Does the protection hinge on the requirement for a well-regulated militia, or does the right reside independently with the people regardless of militia service?
And that tension is right at the heart of modern legal interpretation. At the time it was written, the country lacked a standing national army. They relied heavily on militias for defense.
Right.
But the language also clearly states the right belongs to the people. It's an amendment that links an institutional need security with an individual right arms possession.
Following that, we get to the fascinating historical artifact of Amendment 3, the quartering of soldiers.
This is an amendment that just perfectly reflects the immediate historical grievances against the British. It prohibits the quartering of soldiers in any private house without the owner's consent during peacetime. It's a powerful statement about the sanctity of private property and preventing military intrusion into civilian life.
Then Amendment 4, which is the cornerstone of modern policing law, search and seizure. What is the fundamental principle this amendment protects?
It guarantees the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. And that word unreasonable, that's the core legal standard.
And it requires warrants.
It requires warrants to be judicially sanctioned based upon probable cause and supported by oath or affirmation. specifically describing the place to be searched and the items to be seized.
So it sets up this idea that the state can't just wander into your life. They have to have specific, reasoned cause. And if the Fourth Amendment deals with the moment of investigation and arrest, the following four amendments, 5 through 8, deal with what happens after that moment.
Yes.
They're the comprehensive shield protecting the accused in the justice system.
That's a great way to put it. These due process amendments ensure that if the state chooses to prosecute you, they have to follow a set, highly protective procedure. And Amendment 5 alone packs in several huge concepts.
Okay, walk us through Amendment 5. It's so much more than just taking the Fifth.
It is. It contains 4 essential protections. First, the right to a grand jury for serious federal crimes. Second, protection against double jeopardy. You can't be tried twice for the same crime after an acquittal. Third, the famous protection against compulsory self-incrimination, which is the basis for Miranda rights. And fourth, the due process clause, that the government cannot deprive you of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And finally, it includes the requirement for just compensation if private property is taken for public use eminent domain.
That is a massive amount of protection bundled into one amendment. So once we get through the grand jury and self-incrimination, Amendment 6 focuses on the trial itself.
Yes, Amendment 6 guarantees all the rights necessary for a fair trial. The right to a speedy and public trial, the right to an impartial jury, the right to be informed of the accusation, the right to confront witnesses against you, and crucially, the right to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in your favor and the assistance of counsel for your defense.
It ensures the accused can mount a robust defense.
Absolutely.
These amendments are designed to prevent the government from just steamrolling a citizen once they're charged. Where does Amendment 7 fit into this judicial framework?
Amendment 7 steps away from criminal proceedings and guarantees the right to a trial by jury, specifically in civil cases. So, disputes over property or money exceeding a certain value. It preserves a common law tradition, reinforcing the idea that citizens should resolve private disputes through popular judgment.
And wrapping up the protections for the accused is Amendment 8, addressing government retribution.
Amendment 8 protects against cruel and unusual punishment. It also prohibits excessive bail and excessive fines. It's a restraint on the government's ability to punish, ensuring that the penalty fits the crime, and that pretrial punishment via bail isn't disproportionately punitive.
So these four amendments, 5 through 8, they're the procedural foundation of American justice. Finally, we conclude the Bill of Rights with two essential principles, Amendments 9 and 10, which speak to the very structure of the government.
Right. Amendment 9 addresses the construction of the Constitution. It states that the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people.
Why was that so critical to include?
It directly addresses that Federalist concern we mentioned earlier, that by listing some rights, they might inadvertently exclude others. So Amendment 9 functions as a safety net. It makes it clear that the rights listed are not exhaustive.
Okay. And then Amendment 10, the Reserve Clause, clarifies the balance of power.
It's the ultimate structural check. Amendment 10 says that powers not delegated to the federal government by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or the people. This just reinforces the principle of federalism. It limits the scope of the central government.
Okay, that gives us a clear understanding of the text. Now, let's revisit the historical narrative with some deep dive nuggets, the surprising facts that show just how messy this founding process really was.
Let's start with George Mason, the champion of the Bill of Rights. You mentioned his proposal. Was he successful right away?
Absolutely not. And this is key. When Mason first requested a Bill of Rights during the early days of the convention, the other delegates voted his proposal down.
They rejected it.
They flat out rejected it. It only gained traction later when the strategic need for ratification made it politically necessary to address those anti-Federalist concerns.
That completely reframes the story from an ideological consensus to a tough negotiation driven by political pragmatism.
Which leads to our second nuance. Despite that fierce Federalist versus anti-Federalist argument, our sources confirm that no delegates at the convention were fundamentally against the idea of rights.
No, the dispute was over the methodology.
Exactly. The question wasn't, should citizens have rights, but is enumerating them the safest way to secure them?
And the Federalists were concerned that listing rights might imply the government granted them, rather than merely recognizing pre-existing natural rights. This wasn't a fight of good versus bad. It was a debate over complex constitutional theory.
And for our final nugget, Let's look at the sheer breadth of suggestions James Madison had to wade through. He didn't just rubber stamp state proposals, he filtered them carefully. And the sources reveal that one major suggestion Madison chose to omit was the idea that taxation would have been voluntary.
Imagine that. A voluntarily funded government would have completely crippled the new republic. It would have sent them right back to the failed system of the Articles of Confederation, where the central authority had no effective way to raise revenue.
Yeah, the fact that they were even seriously considering voluntary taxation emphasizes that deep-seated fear of centralized power and how desperately the founders were trying to limit the new government's reach, even if some of those proposed limits were entirely impractical.
Madison had to navigate between preserving liberty and enabling governance. And that's the tightrope they walked. They secured the freedoms while making sure the government could still, for example, raise an army or pay its debts.
So we've taken this journey from intense political deadlock to the careful codification of freedom. These 10 amendments, drafted quickly but born from profound ideological conflict, secure everything from your right to speak publicly to your protection against unreasonable searches.
And this knowledge is so crucial for you, the listener. These documents are not ancient history. They are the active legal limits defining government behavior today. Understanding the specific language, knowing the difference between the right to assemble and speech that incites violence, or the difference between slander and libel, that is how you navigate your rights in the modern world.
It's all about appreciating those specific essential boundaries. And we want to leave you with a reflective thought that builds on this source material. Considering how vital all of these protections are, which of the 5 freedoms listed in the First Amendment, religion, speech, press, assembly, or petition, do you personally believe is the most foundational?
Yeah, think about which one, if you removed it, would cause the entire structure of the republic to fall apart first. It forces you to prioritize and really understand the inherent weight and necessity of each one for a free society.
Thank you for joining us for this day in his story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in his story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.